This is a tiny book written...
From the Doll's House?
Yes, written especially for Queen Mary's Doll's House Library. The Doll's House was made for Queen Mary in the early 1920s to thank her for her help to the nation during the First World War and the economic difficulties afterwards, and to showcase arts, craft, literature which had been suffering in the economic turmoil. So Princess Marie Louise, who was a friend of Queen Mary and a cousin of King George V, put together the Doll's House and worked with an author called E.V. Lucas to get
create
books
the library.
To create the library. And this is one of the books that was...
Can I pick it up?
You may pick it up, but it's very delicate for opening. And this is the book that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle sent into the Doll's House Library.
Extraordinary, isn't it?
And he's written it in his own hand, in tiny handwriting. He was sent a tiny little booklet to write in, and then it was bound afterwards. It's an original Sherlock Holmes story that he wrote especially for the Doll's House.
It's a very, very short story.
It's a very short one. It's Watson and Holmes at breakfast, and Watson tells Holmes that anyone can do his superficial trick of making deductions, and he suggests that Holmes is taking to financial speculation because he's made a gasp at that page in the newspaper. And Holmes proves Watson wrong on all of his points and is rather cutting to him and says he's not particularly clever, because actually he was looking at the cricket page, which is opposite the finance page, and he was worried about the cricket score.
No doubt you will soon acquire it. It's extraordinary to get a story into such a tiny little thing.
Yes,
But it's so beautiful. I mean, you know, the sort of who did all the bindings? Were they all bound together?
They were all bound by several different binderies.
Yes.
This one is by Sangorsky and Sutcliffe, which is one of the premier binderies of the early 20th century. And as you can see, it's very delicately done, and it's got tiny little writing on the spine. And in the on the inside front board, each book has a tiny little book plate, which was designed by E.H. Shepherd, who illustrated Winnie the Pooh. Yes.
Fascinating. Never seen that. How lovely. It must be such fun to have done them, to, you know, put the whole library together for a doll's house.
Such a wonderful window into the 1920s, into literature in the 1920s, and what everyone wanted to write about. People wanted to write about fairies because they thought fairies might live in the doll's house. Arthur Conan Doyle actually believed in fairies, so he might have thought that fairies were going to be reading his book. Others submitted poems. A.A. Milne sent in his poem Vespers.
He did. What other authors?
G.K. Chesterton, Siegfried Sassoon, Max Beerbohm, and just so many of the significant 20th century authors, lots of First World War poets.
Yeah, it's such a sort of enchanting idea, isn't it, to have a I mean, you could so easily have done it with false books.
Yes,
with
but they were
just their names
determined
on the
not
back,
to.
But actually to get the authors to write inside them.
Yes, well that was Sir Edwin Lutyens' idea. He was the architect of the Doll's House, and he'd wanted to commission little printed copies of the classics, but it would have been prohibitively expensive to do. So he just said, oh, I'll ask my friend J.M. Barrie if he'll just write a little manuscript for it, and then we can see if other authors will do the same.
And I suppose
Barrie did,
jumped
and
on
everyone,
the bandwagon.
most people did, some
Who
didn't.
declined?
George Bernard Shaw was particularly rude in his refusal to write, but others, Virginia Woolf,
did he say?
We don't know.
No.
That's
I
so
see,
frustrating.
there's no record of it.
Princess Marie Louise wrote in her memoirs that he was particularly rude, but we don't know why. Vita Sackville-West did contribute a little manuscript about a little spirit living in the doll's house itself, but she'd yet to meet Virginia Woolf at that point, so she was not able to persuade her to contribute. The more modernist authors tended not to want to do it. It was, I thought it was
So how
them,
many
some of
books
them.
altogether?
The 170 books that are manuscripts in the Doll's House, and then there's a lot of printed books as well that were, some were printed especially for it, like little railway timetables or little newspapers, little copies of Country Life, and then others were collected, like copies of the Bible and copies of Shakespeare.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for showing it to me. I wanted to put it in my pocket and take it away.